Hey guys. Back when I first started YouTube, probably, I think it was early September, I had contacted JoeFish and asked him if I could narrate his stories, to which he gave me permission. I did one of his stories and then immediately noticed another narrator telling his stories. And while that happens all the time, since I noticed it, I didn't want to repeat the pattern. So I had kind of forgotten about Joe's stories. Until last week, when he contacted me to let me know that he'd written a part 8. So I decided to share with you all the rest of his stories. I broke them down into 2 parts, the first part being this Wednesday, and the rest will be next Wednesday, so enjoy. Number 1. There's a reason I don't stay in motels anymore. I have been a truck driver for some time now, and I have experienced many things on the road. Some have stayed with me for years, while some will probably stay with me forever. One of these experiences will for sure stay with me until the day I die. I had been placed on a very long journey, taking a load 10 hours cross country. There was nothing but dreadful music on the radio, and I was beginning to get tired. It had got dark some time ago, and now it was extremely late. I decided to call in for the night at the next motel I came across. I didn't even care if it was a bad one. I now wish I had. I pulled up and looked around. The place looked awful. The paint was peeling off the walls. The windows were dirty, and there were multiple letters missing from the sign. The strangest part was that there were no cars in the parking lot. On any other occasion, I'd have taken that was a strong warning sign to stay away. But I'd been driving all day, and I did not have the energy to get back in the truck and drive somewhere else. I went over to the reception, and there was no one there. I rang the bell, and still no one came. I waited a few more minutes, repeatedly ringing the bell. Annoyed, I turned around and began to walk away. But then I heard a voice. I looked around to see an elderly man with very few teeth grinning wildly. He welcomed me to the motel and asked me if he could be of assistance. I told him that I needed a room for the night and that I'd like a room with a view of my truck. I always ask this at motels. It just makes me feel more secure for some reason. He fumbled around for a bit and then threw me a key with a room number on it. I paid him up front because I'd be setting off early in the morning. As I was walking up the stairs, I heard him say in a muffled tone, "You have a great night's sleep." He then chuckled to himself quietly. This should have creeped me out. I was too exhausted to care. The first thing I noticed when I entered the room was that it was not facing my truck, like I'd asked. Instead, just the dumpsters on the other side of the building. The bed was comfy, and the room was big. But I couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. There were stains on the carpet, dark stains. The walls were covered in marks, and there was something in a plastic bag in the bath. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was big. I opened it to see inside, and I was almost sick. Inside of the bag was the head of a pig. Not nicely severed like a butcher would do, but a deep, rough cut. This was absolutely disgusting. But as the walls were crawling with cockroaches anyway, I decided it best not to use the shower or the bath and drew the curtain across. I tried to forget what I had seen. I awoke not to the sound of my alarm clock, but the sound of voices outside my room. It was 2 a.m. Who would be out of bed at that time? I just assumed it was another guest and tried to get back to sleep. But before I could, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key in the lock. I flew out of bed and into the bathroom and immediately hid in the tub, trying to ignore the pig's head that lay next to me. The curtain was drawn across, but I could see a small amount through the moth-eaten hole in the curtain. I heard the door swing open and the sound of footsteps as someone entered the room. I peeked through the hole to see a man in a ski mask walk over to my bed. He had something in his hand. The man threw off the covers and cursed. I then heard the man of the voice from the reception whisper, "What's wrong?" The man in the ski mask responded, "He's not here. He must have left earlier than we would have thought." I then saw the man start leaving, and a huge amount of relief washed over me. Then he stopped, turned around, and walked straight into the bathroom. I felt like my heart had stopped beating. I tried to flatten myself into the bottom of the tub, although I knew it wouldn't do much good. He stood there for a few minutes. I then heard the man cough, spit something into the sink, and leave. When I was sure that they were gone, I got out, grabbed my bag, and left. I used the emergency exit at the side of the building. I ran around to my truck, got in, started the engine, and drove. As I was leaving, I saw someone in the window staring at me, grinning his nasty, toothless grin. I didn't look back and got out of there. I'd driven nearly 20 miles when I was pulled over by a highway patrolman. He asked me if I was aware my back doors were hanging open. I told him no and went to check it out. A large amount of my load had been stolen, and many other boxes had been slashed open. I told the patrolman everything about the motel and what had happened to me. He shook his head in disbelief and told me something that made me gasp. "That motel 20 miles up the road? The owner died 4 years ago, and it's been abandoned ever since." Number 2. Being a truck driver means constant travel. Constant travel means constant change. And constant change means constant danger. This was something I had to accept when I took the job all those years ago. But back then, I thought that nothing would ever happen to me. There was no chance of me running into danger. I was completely invincible behind the wheel of my rig. But I was so damn wrong. I'd crossed the state border a while ago, and my eyes were starting to get heavy. I hadn't seen anyone else on the road for miles, and I was getting bored of listening to chat show after chat show. Suddenly, the truck started slowing down. I put my foot down harder on the pedal, but it had no effect. I shook myself wide awake and sat up. My truck went a few more meters, then came to a complete halt. I just sat there for a minute, confused, before I unclipped my belt and climbed out. I quickly came to the realization that I had run out of fuel. I was pretty pissed at myself for not paying more attention and thinking about it. I did hear the warning bleep some time ago. I was about to call my boss when I heard a voice from behind me. I spun around really fast, holding my phone as if it were a weapon. The man slowly approaching me looked to be in his early 40s, with graying hair and a mustache. He seemed to be chewing a lump of tobacco and walking with a slight limp. "Looks like you ran out of gas," he said, still approaching me. I shrugged and told him that I'd be fine and started to walk back toward my truck. "I got a place not so far from here where I could get you some fuel." I didn't believe him. Too many things didn't add up. Why was he out here? At this location, at this time, just as I broke down? I said that I already had some in the back and I didn't need any help. I got in and locked the doors. I just wanted this guy to go away. I saw him walk off into the tree line and disappear. I called my boss, and he said he'd send someone out to tow me, but they might take some time. I ended up falling asleep where I sat, feeling much more secure with my doors locked and the guy gone. I woke up some time later and realized that I was moving. I was confused at first, but then remembered that someone had been sent to tow the truck. I wondered why they didn't wake me up. Maybe they tried. I am a deep sleeper and the doors were locked. I noticed that it was still dark outside and tried to work out where we were on the map. I couldn't see any signs along the side of the road and had no clue where I was. I opened the window and shouted round to the tower, "Where are we going?" Why hadn't he just taken me to the garage? After a while, we appeared to be on a very rural road, almost like we were driving through a forest. In the distance, there was a large barn we seemed to be heading toward. I couldn't get the attention of the tower, so I called my boss to see what was going on. He sounded extremely puzzled and said that the tower wasn't due to arrive at my location for another hour. I was losing it and shouted at my boss, "Then who the hell is towing me?" My boss called the police and told me to try and get out of the vehicle. I didn't need telling twice. I swung the door open and jumped out. I was winded and lay there for a moment. The tow truck then stopped. The tower must have heard the sound of the door. I got up immediately and ran. I had no clue where I was and chose a random direction. Looking over my shoulder, I saw him and immediately recognized the face. It was the man from earlier. He spat a mound of tobacco out of his mouth and jumped out of the truck. I ran faster and faster, but then I heard the noise of a gunshot ring out. I hit the floor and crawled behind the nearest tree, terrified. The man was walking fast now and shouting for me to come out. He didn't see exactly where I went, but he probably had a pretty good idea. I managed to drag myself behind a log, breathing as quietly as I could. The man was getting closer, saying, "Turn yourself in and it'll be quick." I couldn't move any more now. He would hear me. The man stopped right next to my log, looked around, and ran off in another direction. I breathed a sigh of relief and looked out. The man was about 100 meters away and looking right at me. I bolted for the truck and made it underneath the sounds of bullets slamming against the metal. I had nowhere to run, and he was here. Just as I thought it was all over, I heard the sound of sirens. The man swore and ran off into the woods. I climbed out from under the truck and met the officers that had arrived. 2 of them had already run off after the man. They asked me what had happened and took me back to the station for questioning. I answered all of their questions and told them about the barn I was being towed to. It was inspected and sealed off. When asking what they found, I was told that it was best that I didn't know. I can only imagine what would have happened to me if I had stayed in the truck. However, I do know one thing. That man is still on the loose, and I can only pity the poor soul who runs into him next. Number 3. As a truck driver, I travel a lot. Traveling to places I wish I hadn't been. As a trucker, I see a lot. Seen some things I wish I'd never seen. As a trucker, I also experience a lot. But it is these things that make me who I am, and that's why I love this job, not knowing what I'll run into next. However, unknowing means you cannot foreplan how you will act in certain situations. And I do not make the right choices in certain situations at all. I was in the UK a while back, taking a load up to the north end of England. It was dark. Stars in the sky. I couldn't quite focus on the road for some reason and kept fiddling with the radio. A few minutes passed of me doing this. I looked up and caught it right in my headlights. Sprawled out on the ground was a body, not moving. I pulled the truck into the side and climbed out. I approached the body slowly. I cautiously asked, "Are you okay, sir?" No reply. I walked over, about to take his pulse. Then I realized there was no need. Blood was oozing from underneath him, an obvious stab wound. It was clear to see the man was dead, and I knew I had to call the police. I dialed and explained to them what I had found. They said they would send someone out to me and to stay put. A few moments later, I heard a voice, shouting, and the sound of footsteps, fast footsteps, hitting the floor hard. I could make out the silhouettes of 2 men, one carrying a bag. I knew exactly what it was for. I sprinted back to my truck and clambered in, heart pounding. How could this be happening to me? That was the question thumping inside my head. The men made it to the body now, one chucking the bag onto his shoulder, then running for his car. I hadn't seen them parked on the other side of the road. The second man ran over to my truck and started trying to climb up. I opened the door powerfully on his face. He cried out in agony and fell backwards. I did the only thing I could think to do: drive. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and got out of there as quickly as I could, relieved that I'd gotten away in time. The relief didn't last long, as I noticed headlights behind me. I was being chased down, and of course, he was much faster than me. The car behind me was gradually gaining. I knew I couldn't outrun him, but I sure could outsize him. I waited until he was right on my tail and then crushed the brake. I was flung forward in my seat. By the time I had recovered, he was gone. I did not know where or how. I hadn't hit him. Up ahead on the left I saw a turn, and could only assume he had taken that. I put my foot down again. I wanted to make sure that the other man did not catch up. I had been speeding along for a good 5 minutes when I noticed something in the middle of the road ahead. It was 2 cars. 2 cars that I recognized. It was the men. They had formed some kind of roadblock. 1,000 thoughts were spinning around in my head. Had I really stumbled across something that serious that these people needed me dead? Why would they not just attempt to get away? What do I do now? Earlier, I talked about how in certain situations, I make the wrong choices. This was one of those times. I plowed straight through the block and didn't stop. The cops arrived at the scene and questioned me on what had happened and how 2 cars ended up lying wrecked in the middle of the road. I told them what I had done. One man had been hospitalized and the other had escaped on foot. Detectives found fresh tire marks nearby and deduced that the man that had gotten away did so by car. It turned out that the men were gang leaders. The 2 of them had killed the man I found on the side of the road, who was also identified as the leader of a gang. I still curse myself that the other man had gotten away. For some reason, I can never shake the feeling that somehow I'll see him again. Number 4. The mind is a delicate vessel. Feed it too much, and it collapses. Feed it too little, and it dissolves. But if you keep feeding the mind the same thing over and over, it becomes routine and nothing out of the ordinary, or so they say. Over the course of my trucking career, I've seen all manner of terrifying things. More than any one person should be subjected to. And it is these things that have made my mind collapse. I hear a noise at night, and it doesn't feel like an ordinary occurrence. Instead, it petrifies me. All the terrible things that I have experienced come rushing back to me, and all it would take is a snap of a twig behind me in the forest. My experiences have made me paranoid, but it is this very paranoia that saved my life. I had been driving for what seemed like days, endlessly moving forward along the road after road after road, my eyes fixated on the ground in front of me. I was starving. I needed a break, and my Radiohead playlist was coming to an end. I pulled up at a gas station and filled up the rig. I paid and moved it to a parking lot on the other side of the station. The parking lot was nearly deserted, but a few cars were scattered around here and there. I didn't like the feel of the place. Something about it made me shiver. I shrugged it off and went into the station for a coffee and a bite to eat. I returned to my truck an hour or so later and got in. I had driven a good few miles when I heard a tapping. I slowed my truck down and observed the road around me. There were no other cars. Where did that noise come from? I carried on driving, and after a while, I heard it again. Even louder this time. What was going on? By now, I was incredibly confused, but continued driving nevertheless. After 20 minutes, I heard repeated tapping. This time, I knew exactly where it came from. It was from inside the truck. If I wasn't so paranoid all the time, I would have passed it off as something in the mechanics making the sound. But I knew I couldn't just assume that. I stopped at the side of the road and got out. Walked around to the back. The first thing I noticed was that the clamp had been busted off and the doors had been tampered with. I was puzzled and opened them up. Inside, everything was as it should be. No one inside. No boxes moved. It all looked to be okay. I reattached the clamp and got back in. I knew something human had broken the lock. Maybe they broke it but couldn't figure out how to get the doors open. While this was unsettling, at least I knew nothing was in there. I drove back off into the night. I drove for hours more when eventually I suddenly felt a great unease. Something was in the back. I knew it. I stopped the truck, got my gun out of the glove box, and marched around. I undid the clamp and flung the doors open, my gun raised. Inside again, I saw nothing. I couldn't believe it. I knew something was in there. I lowered my gun and was ready to walk away when I saw something move. Something was climbing out from behind some boxes and standing up. The dark figure stood at the other end of the truck. I shot and missed. I shot again and again, without hitting whoever it was. The thing started walking toward me, fast. It had nearly reached me and I pulled the trigger. My gun clicked empty. I threw it onto the ground and hurled the doors shut, feeling the pressure put against them on the other side. I managed to clip the bolt in immediately and called the police. They were with me quickly and I explained the situation. One officer opened the doors while the other covered him. Both of them entered the truck and began to look behind the boxes. A few minutes later, they got out and told me they didn't find anyone. but they did find one thing. A carving of a body with a slit throat had been etched into one of the boxes at the back. The knife was still stuck in the box. It was tested for fingerprints, but none were found. A few weeks later, I was driving along when I heard tapping once again. I couldn't bring myself to look in the back. I just told myself it was my mind playing tricks on myself. And I pray to God I was right. Well, I don't know about you, but I have a sudden urge for a road trip. See you next time.